Afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's January 23rd, 23rd day of the new year. Only 342 days remain to the year's over with. Let's talk about holidays and observances. Maybe we will. That's interesting. National Pie Day. From chicken to apple, pecan to mushroom. Grab yourself a slice of classic pastry. Maternal Health Awareness Day. National Rhubarb Pie Day. National Handwriting Day. There's also Clashing Clothes Day. Don't be afraid to break the rules and wear bizarre clothes. Snowplow Mailbox Hockey Day. National Measure Your Feet Day. See how they grew over the winter. Energy Saving Week. Farmhouse Breakfast Week. Cancer Talk Week. No Name Calling Week. National Fresh Squeezed Juice Week. World Kiwanis Week. Hunt for Happiness Week. Week of Prayer for Christian Unity. And Snow Sculpting Week. State, Temptation, another rapper, and Mariska Hargitay. January 23rd is part of January, Dry January, Manuary, where you embrace your inner lumberjack. National Blood Donor Month, Veganary, Thyroid Awareness Month, National Birth Defects Awareness Month, Cervical Cancer Awareness Month, National Slow Cooking Month, Bread Machine Baking Month, National Clean Up Your Computer Month. Give your computer a little TLC by getting the dust bunnies out and all the old files you don't use anymore. And a National Brain Teaser Month, National Be On Purpose Month, National Clean Up Your IRS Act Month, National Skating Month, National Soup Month, Fresh Florida Tomato Month, National CBD Month, Apple and Apricot Month, National Hobby Month, National Oatmeal Month. And till I was about 10, I lived on oatmeal. National Bass Safety Month, Clap for Health Month, National Poverty in America Awareness Month, National Black Diamond Month, Get a Balanced Life Month, Get Organized Month, International Creativity Month, National Be Kind to Food Servers Month, Celebration of Life Month, and National Hot Tea Month. All that having been said, going to do our little history segment. In 393, Roman Emperor Theodosius I proclaims his 8-year-old son, Honorius, as co-emperor. In 971, using crossbows, Song Dynasty troops soundly defeat a war elephant corps of the Southern Han at Shio. 1229, the episcopal seat is moved from Lucinian to Carinian, located near the current center of Turku by the permission of Pope Gregory IX. The date is starting to be considered as the founding of Turku. 1264, in the conflict between King Henry III of England and his rebellious barons led by Simon de Montfort, King Louis IX of France issues the Peace of Amiens, a one-sided decision in favor of Henry that later leads to the Second Barons' War. 1368, Zhu Wanzhang proclaims himself the Hongwu Emperor, beginning the Ming Dynasty. 1546, having published nothing for 11 years, Francois Rabelais publishes the Tiers Livre, his sequel to Gargantua and Pantagruel. 1556, the deadliest earthquake in history, the Shanghai earthquake. It's Shanghai province in China. Death toll may have been as high as 830,000. 1565, the Deccan Sultanates defeat Ramaraya of the Vijayanagara Empire at the Battle of Talikota, resulting in over 100,000 casualties and the destruction of the capital, Vijayanagara. 1570, James Stuart, the first Earl of Moray, regent for the infant King James VI of Scotland, is assassinated by a firearm. First recorded instance of a firearm assassination. 1571, the Royal Exchange opens in London. 1579, the Union of Utrecht forms a Protestant republic in the Netherlands. 1656, Blaise Pascal publishes the first of his letters Provinciales. In 1719, the Principality of Liechtenstein is created within the Holy Roman Empire. 1789, Georgetown College, the first Catholic university in the U.S., is founded in Georgetown, Maryland, which is now part of Washington, D.C., when Bishop John Carroll, Reverend Robert Molyneux, and Reverend John Ashton purchased land for the proposed academy for the education of youth. 1793 saw the second partition of Poland. 1795, after crossing the frozen Zuider Zee, the French cavalry captured 14 Dutch ships and 850 guns, in a rare occurrence of the surrender of naval vessels to land forces. 1846, slavery in Tunisia is abolished. 1849, Elizabeth Blackwell is awarded her M.D. by the Geneva Medical College in Geneva, New York, becoming the first United States female doctor. 1870, in Montana, U.S. cavalrymen killed 173 Native Americans, mostly women and children. What's become known as the Marias Massacre. The also known as the Baker Massacre or the Pagan Massacre was a massacre of pagan Blackfeet native peoples, which was committed by United States Army forces under Major Eugene Mortimer Baker as part of the Indian Wars. It occurred in Montana Territory. Approximately 200 Native Americans were killed. Most of them were women, children, and older men. As part of the campaign to suppress Mountain Chief's band of pagan Blackfeet, the Army attacked a different band led by Chief Heavy Runner, to whom the U.S. government had previously promised protection, resulting in public outrage and a long-term shift toward a peace policy by the federal government, as advocated by President U.S. Grant. He kept the Bureau of Indian Affairs as a division of the Department of Interior. All through the War Department was trying to gain control. He appointed men recommended by various religious clergy, including Quakers and Methodists, as Indian agents, in the hopes they'd be somewhat free of the corruption he had found in that department. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of corruption in the federal government. I'm dealing with it in the VA. 1879, Anglo-Zulu War. The Battle of Rorke's Drift ends on this date. 1899, the Malolos Constitution is inaugurated, establishing the first Philippine Republic. Emilio Aguinaldo was sworn in as the first president. 1900, the Second Boer War. The Battle of Spion Kop between the forces of the South African Republican and the Orange Free State and the British forces ends in a British defeat. 1904, Aldersund fire. Norwegian coastal town Aldersund is devastated by fire, leaving 10,000 people homeless and one person dead. Kaiser Wilhelm II funds the rebuilding of the town in Jugendstil style. 1909, RMS Republic, a passenger ship of the White Star Line, becomes the first ship to use the CQD distress signal after colliding with another ship, the SS Florida, off to the Massachusetts coastline. 6 people are killed in that event. The Republic sinks the next day. 1912, the International Opium Convention is signed at The Hague. 1919, First Regional Congress of Peasants, Workers, and Insurgents is held by the Magnificina. 1920, the Netherlands refuses to surrender the exiled Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany to the Allies. 1937, the trial of the anti-Soviet Trotskyist Center sees 17 mid-level communists accused of sympathizing with Leon Trotsky and plotting to overthrow Joseph Stalin's regime. 1941, Charles Lindbergh testifies before Congress and recommends the U.S. negotiate a neutrality pact with Hitler. He was very much pro-Hitler. 1942, World War II. Battle of Rabaul commences Japan's invasion of Australia's territory of New Guinea. 1943, World War II. Troops of the British Eighth Army capture Tripoli in Libya from the German-Italian Panzer Army. 1945, World War II. German Admiral Karl Donitz launches Operation Hannibal. Operation Hannibal was a German naval operation involving the evacuation by sea of German troops and civilians from the Kurland pocket of East Prussia, West Prussia, and Pomerania from January to May 1945 as the Red Army advanced during the East Prussian and East Pomeranian offensives and the various subsidiary operations. It's one of the largest evacuations by sea in history. 1950, the Knesset resolves that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. 1957, American inventor Walter Frederick Morrison sells the rights to his flying disc to the Wham-O Toy Company. They later rename it the Frisbee. And it did rather well, I think. 1958, after a general uprising and rioting in the streets, President Marcos Perez Jimenez leaves Venezuela. 1960, the Beth escape USS Tristy breaks a depth record by descending to 35,797 feet in the Pacific Ocean. 1963, the Guinea-Bissau War of Independence officially begins when PAIGC guerrilla fighters attacked the Portuguese army stationed in Titi. The PAIGC is the African Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde. It's a political party, recently formed to peacefully campaign for independence from Portugal. Turned into an armed conflict in the 1960s, one of the belligerents in the Guinea-Bissau War of Independence. Towards the end of the war, the party established a socialist one-party state that remained intact until multi-party democracy was introduced in the early 1990s. (1964) 24th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution prohibited the use of poll tax in national elections. It was ratified on this date. Poll taxes used to be used in order to disenfranchise various groups. 1967, diplomatic relations between the Soviet Union and the Ivory Coast are established. 1967, Milton Keynes in England is founded as a new town by the Order in Council with a planning brief to become a city of 250,000 people. Its initial designated area enclosed 3 existing towns and 21 villages. The area to be developed was largely farmland with evidence of continuous settlement dating back to the Bronze Age. 1968, the USS Pueblo is attacked and seized by the Korean People's Navy. That was... But if it says People's Navy, it's generally communist, so it makes it North Korea. It's a component of the Korean People's Army. The communists love to call themselves People's this and People's that, but it's not. It's a small group that runs everything. 1982, World Airways Flight 30 overshoots the runway at Logan International Airport in Boston, crashes into Boston Harbor. 2 people are missing and presumed dead. 1986, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inducts its first members. Little Richard, Chuck Berry, James Brown, Ray Charles, Sam Cooke, Fats Domino, the Everly Brothers, Buddy Holly, Jerry Lee Lewis, and the one and only Elvis the Pelvis Presley. 1987, Mohammed Saeed Hersey Morgan sends a letter of death to Somali President Saeed Barre, proposing a genocide of the Isaaq people. 1997, Madeleine Albright becomes the first woman to serve as United States Secretary of State. 1998, Netscape announces Mozilla with the intention to release communicator code as open source. 2001, 5 people attempt to set themselves on fire in Beijing's Tiananmen Square, an act that many people later claimed is staged by the Chinese Communist Party to frame Falun Gong and escalate their prosecution. 2002, journalist Daniel Pearl is kidnapped in Karachi, Pakistan, and subsequently murdered. He was an American journalist who worked for the Wall Street Journal. January 23rd, 2002, is kidnapped by Islamist militants while he's on his way to what he had expected would be an interview with Pakistani religious cleric Mubarak Ali Galani in the city of Karachi. Pearl had moved to Mumbai, India, upon taking up a regional posting by his newspaper, and later entered Pakistan to cover the war on terror, which was launched by the U.S. in response to the September 11th attacks in 2001. By the time of his abduction, he'd been investigating the links between British citizen Richard Reed, the so-called shoe bomber, and al-Qaeda. Reed had reportedly completed his training at a facility owned by Galani, who had been accused by the U.S. of being affiliated with the Pakistani terrorist group Jamaat-ul-Fuqara. So he was kidnapped and later murdered. 2003, very weak signal from Pioneer 10 is detected for the last time, but no usable data can be extracted. Pioneer 10, for those who are not familiar with it, was a NASA space probe launched in 1972. Completed the first mission to the planet Jupiter. Became the first of the planetary probes, 11 artificial objects, to achieve the escape velocity needed to leave the solar system. This space exploration project was conducted by the NASA Ames Research Center in California. It, I think, basically just wore out. 2018, a 7.9 earthquake occurs in the Gulf of Alaska. It's tied as the 6th largest earthquake ever recorded in the U.S., but there are no reports of significant damage or fatalities. 2018, a double car bombing in Benghazi, Libya, kills at least 33 people and wounds dozens of others. The victims include both military personnel as well as civilians, according to local officials. 2018, China-U.S. trade war begins when President Donald Trump places tariffs on Chinese solar panels and washing machines. 2022, mutinying Burkinabe soldiers led by Paul-Henri Santiago Damiba deposed and detained President Marc Christian Kabore amid widespread and anti-government protests. 2024, Northwestern Air Flight 738 crashes after takeoff from Fort Smith Airport, Northwest Territories in Canada. Kills 6 people. Well, that ends our little history segment. We're going to go to a few news things. The first images from President Trump's deportation sweep are in. Hundreds were arrested, including violent gangbangers. John Brennan is complaining that Trump misrepresented the Hunter Biden laptop letter. He said, "We never said it was Russian disinformation. We said it had the earmarks of a Russian operation." So he had his security clearance revoked yesterday. In fact, by executive order, Trump revoked the security clearances of the 51 former Intel officials who signed that 2020 letter, claiming the release of emails from the laptop had all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation. A lot of them were open supporters of Joe Biden's presidential campaign against Trump. Fetterman has voted against a bill called the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. He and other Senate Democrats blocked the measure for advancing toward a vote in the chamber. The measure would require healthcare practitioners to seek to save the life of a baby born during an attempted abortion and ensure the infant is hospitalized. Biden's clemency for nonviolent inmates included a Connecticut child killer, Adrian Peeler. He's accused of shooting an 8-year-old in the back of the head before killing his mother. He was a Connecticut drug kingpin. Killed a mother and her 8-year-old son so she wouldn't testify against his brother. And he got a commutation as part of former President Biden's clemency for nearly 2,500 federal inmates he described as nonviolent. I think he has a problem with some of his definitions. Mayors and local officials could face arrest if they don't comply with Trump's mass deportations. $50,000 folks have been forced to flee their homes as fast-moving fire erupts in Los Angeles area. Putin is upset over Russia's economy ahead of possible Trump tariffs. Lawmakers are trying to see if their Medal of Honor recipients, their pensions would be increased sixfold under a new proposal. There are 60 living Medal of Honor recipients. The legislation reintroduced by Texas Republicans Troy Niels and Senator Ted Cruz, New Hampshire Democrat Representative Chris Pappas, would bring pay for those who received the nation's highest award from $16,880 a year to $100,000. Since there are 60 living Medal of Honor recipients, as I said, since it was created in 1863, there have been 3,500 folks awarded the highest honor. Airlines are jumping on the health-conscious bandwagon. They've got new alcohol-free options and health-conscious dishes for 2025. Birmingham mayor trashes Trump's DEI executive order, calls it the Alabamification of the U.S. government. According to Mayor Randall Woodfin, there's no such thing as going too far with DEI. Let's just throw qualifications out the window. Let's go based on color only. Starbucks has got lagging sales, and they're going to be laying off a whole bunch of folks in March. They're cutting corporate jobs. They bring the prices down and sell a whole lot more coffee, but that's just me. Illegal immigrant hit-and-run suspect caught on a bus headed for Mexico. He was arrested 800 miles from the crime scene. He'd previously been deported from the U.S. at least once. And that's one of the things I find interesting. Some of these folks that are being arrested have been deported 4 and 5 times. Well, the first 100 days of President Trump's term is seeing a lot of changes and has the left just losing its mind. There was a school shooting in Tennessee yesterday, and I mentioned it outside of Nashville. One was killed, one was injured, and the shooter shot himself. Solomon Henderson, 17, was identified as the Antioch High School shooter. Online writings linked to the gunman in Nashville's Antioch High School included racist and anti-Semitic content, photos of a handgun, and praise for mass murderers. Investigators are combing through the writings trying to figure out why this 17-year-old opened fire inside his Nashville area high school. killed Jocelyn Correa Escalante, 16. He wounded a 17-year-old boy before he shot himself. Investigation at this point had been able to establish connection between the shooter and the two shooting victims. They were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, apparently. Sounds like he just wound up being a few sandwiches short of a picnic and went on a spree. Well, Schumer's doing his best to disrupt the new administration. You know, he and Schiff and a few others who spend their life interfering with what the American people want need to join the unemployment line. Well, Ricki Lake, the Hairspray actress, also had a talk show. Her Malibu home was destroyed in the fire. They wouldn't sell their land in Malibu after their home burned down earlier this month in the Palisades fire. A lot of folks out there trying to buy up that land. The Columbia University, there was a Jewish history class going on that was attacked and disrupted by anti-Semitic protesters. But that's okay, though. They're fine, upstanding young men. Okay, on that note, we have finished our little history segment. We've been talking about the last few shows haunted airplanes, haunted ships. We're going to be talking about the Fighting Lady, USS Yorktown. It with USS Hornet and USS Lexington are some of the most famous battleships in World War II. And USS Yorktown now is found at Patriots Point at the mouth of the Cooper River in Charleston Harbor, just a boat ride away from Fort Sumter. And you can easily spot the aircraft carrier. It's one of the few museum ships on display at Patriots Point. I mean, it's so huge it dominates the harbor. Built in an unbelievable 16 months, and the USS Yorktown, an Essex-class carrier named after the They also took time out of their various missions to rescue the astronauts from Apollo 8 who crashed into the sea. Such was her background that she definitely deserved the name, the Fighting Lady. But, interestingly enough, there are many who say she ought to be called the Haunted Lady. Now, a lot of people think that is an accurate description. And not just because scenes from the Philadelphia experiment, a paranormal movie about a possible World War II time slip incident, were filmed on board the Yorktown. Dozens of paranormal experts, including the Yorktown's own paranormal historians and some of the world's most famous paranormal investigators, have investigated this ship. There are also hundreds of everyday people who've become believers as a result of their own ghostly encounter stories. Now, Bruce Orr, former Charleston detective and accomplished paranormal investigator, is probably the foremost expert on the Yorktown hauntings. He's a guide for ghost tours of the ships. He's written a book about the history and hauntings aboard the USS Yorktown. It's called The Ghost of USS Yorktown, The Phantoms of Patriot Point. And in that book, he discusses several of the more intriguing accounts of paranormal experiences on the ship. He also points out bits of evidence that suggests that these stories are more than just misidentified natural phenomena or practical jokers. The number and the quality of paranormal encounters seem to rule out the possibility that a single practical joker's at work. It would take a full staff of jokers working full-time, especially during the graveyard shift, to pull off the pranks equaling the number of supernatural activities that have been reported on the USS Yorktown. And some of this phenomenon is absolutely spectacular. One of the Yorktown's creepiest crewmates is a shadow person, or it could be shadow people. There could be more than one who stalk the ship's dark halls and berths. Witnesses have seen these apparitions so clearly that they mistook them for real people. Hollywood special effects company would be hard-pressed to create this type of illusion. And we need to talk about the witnesses as well. Sources of many of Yorktown's haunting stories are not crackpots. Oh, no. They include seasoned veterans, police detectives, Steely Nerve staff members who are rarely thrown by a sudden but natural creak or crack at night. Or had even had his own weird experience on board the Yorktown. As a veteran investigator and paranormal researcher, he typically refrains from labeling every experience he has as paranormal. But we're going to talk about his experience and see what you think. He said he and another associate who is also into the paranormal that arranged an in-depth investigation of the ship. Specifically, they wanted to investigate the rumors that the ship's hangar deck, that's the place during World War II where warbirds were stored and are currently on display. Only 2 investigators and 1 or 2 security personnel will be on board at the time of the investigation. So in all likelihood, they had the ship to themselves, they thought. Investigation is barely underway when strange things started to happen. While setting up motion sensing equipment, they distinctly heard footsteps walk across the catwalk directly above them. Orr and his friends stared up as the noise passed over them and went toward the other end of the ship. They watched as the sound approached the light and saw a shadow blotted out for a second. Orr stayed below while his friend went up on the stairs to chase his shadow figure. Friend reported he continued to listen to the footsteps, but couldn't make contact with that shadow figure. And both security officers were stationed on the floor below him. Now, that sighting initiated a game of paranormal cat and mouse for the rest of the investigation. Orr said after making his rounds, he returned to the hangar deck. As he walked along, he looked up and saw a shadow cut in front of him. Former investigator, like so many other times in his career, wasn't scared off by the strange run-in. It just made him curious. And then he would use his curiosity and power of observation to spur on his investigation. He stayed in his spot and watched that shadow. He began to wonder, should he just keep watching or should he approach the figure? Well, he decided the best course of action was to move toward the shadow. Not too fast, but then again, not too slow. As he neared the figure, it turned and faded into the darkness. It seemed almost like the shadow person sensed that Orr was getting too close to him. Orr located a bench near the museum and sat down to ponder where the motion sensing equipment should be placed, and strange noises began to issue once again from the section where the investigator had spotted that shadow figure. Went back to the hangar deck, and the on-again, off-again chase continued. This time he saw not 1 but 2 shadows walk in front of the light and block it momentarily. He now saw the 2 figures were standing near a snack bar. Again, as he began to close in on them, the figures made evasive maneuvers. One faded away, and the other one stepped back into the shadows. Well, he lists his night on the Yorktown as definitely one of his weirder experiences. But does the seasoned investigator believe it was a definite paranormal experience? Well, when interviewed about it, he said, "I'm not ready to rubber stamp this experience. The previous one is a ghostly encounter," but he did say what he experienced was not normal. Still has him scratching his head. He discusses it in some detail in his book, Ghost of the USS Yorktown. And he might not be ready to classify the behavior on board the Yorktown as supernatural, but a long list of witnesses who've encountered the shadow people on the ship might not be as reluctant as he is. In fact, there's so many shadow people sightings that they've been given a very World War II nickname. People in the know, staff members, and experts on the hauntings who see a shadow person say they've spotted Shadow Ed. Or to be more specific, Shadow ED, which stands for Enemy Designated, a World War II expression for coming in contact with an enemy. And Shadow Ed's made himself one of the crew on the Yorktown. In fact, he may have been one of the original crew members. According to one story, a security officer at Patriot Point cautiously made his way through the ship on his nightly shift when some sixth sense told him that he wasn't alone. He turned and saw a shadow mass, and the shadow seemed to be in the shape of a person. It was not a shadow cast by some random object. But since no other personnel should have been on board save the security team, and it wasn't one of his colleagues, he certainly thought there was something very odd about it. He contacted the rest of the security team, who assumed an intruder had slipped onto the property. After consulting with them, he considered the sighting real enough to warrant calling in local law enforcement. Well, you have to wonder what the local police thought when they arrived on the scene. Maybe some teams came on board as a dare. Maybe the invested imaginations of security officers who heard one too many tales of Yorkie ghosts hit overdrive. Still, they aren't paid to dismiss possible crimes. They're paid to investigate them. So they began their investigation. When the two cops hit the stairwell to the Charleston Naval Shipyard Museum, they both saw something moving a deck below. It was a large black mass, exactly what had been described by the security officer. Well, according to what they told Ord later, the officers looked at each other and said, "Did you see that?" They quickly turned in the paranormal investigators, and the hunt was on. As trained observers, they estimated the mass to be about twice the size of a human. And it moved away from them at a fast rate of speed, and then it vanished. Secure doors blocked the exit, so the cops concluded that nothing, at least nothing of this earth, could have escaped their ever-tightening blockade. Well, both officers told Orr they believed the site was secure from human intruders and decided to let the security team figure it out. That's exactly what the security team, who had to spend the rest of their shift on board, wanted to hear. Well, it's long been said an army marches on its stomach. And seamen must also sail on their stomachs. They need a secured line to that food. And while soldiers can live off the land, there's nowhere a sailor can pull up into a local restaurant and eat corn from a farmer's field or pop into the kitchen of a friendly home on the way to battle. So that makes the galley the ship's kitchen and mess hall. Of a ship the size of the Yorktown so important, but also be the reason that there is one of the carrier's most haunted spots. According to Orr, one Yorktown staff member was in charge of cleaning up after a group of high-energy Boy Scouts who had just finished up their breakfast in the dining room during one of their one-of-a-kind camp-out on board the grand ship. On that particular quiet fall morning, a blanket of quiet descended over the waters. Everything became even more silent when the rambunctious scouts receded into other quarters of the ship. The worker, whose name was Lori, was most likely not thinking about ghosts. She was thinking about that massive cleanup job that lay ahead of her. When she wiped down the tables and straightened up the chairs, as she had dozens and dozens of times before that. But this time, something was different. This morning, things were exceptionally quiet, unusually so. Pushing the creepy feeling to the back of her mind, she went into the galley where she started to organize things. That took her about 10 minutes, and when she came out of the room, she had just cleaned. When prepared for what she saw, looked like the dining room had been ransacked. The chairs she'd pushed neatly under the table and precisely straightened were now askew. The dining room seemed in worse condition when she found it. Someone or something had scattered the chairs, which were now pulled out into the aisle and rested at odd angles. Any natural explanations you could come up with were weak, very weak. If the Boy Scouts came back into the director room, they were as silent as ninjas, and they only had minutes to perform their work. Once she cleaned up, she did what any other smart person who encountered a blatant example of supernatural activity would do. She went back to the office, locked the door, and stayed there. It wasn't the first time a staff member had an encounter with the unknown aboard the Yorktown. It wouldn't be the last by any means. Over the years, and over the many, many reports of the paranormal on board the ship, the guides and the workers who spend the most time in the cabins, berths, and decks of the carrier have come to some conclusions about the activity. They really don't believe that these spirits are trying to harm the staff. They just enjoy playing pranks, probably like the sailors and pilots did to each other to relieve the tensions of war when they sailed on the ship when they were alive. I mean, let's not forget the old saying, once a sailor, always a sailor. Well, from the USS Yorktown, let's turn to the USS Hornet. It was actually the second carrier named Hornet during World War II. The original carrier was sunk in the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands in 1942. And officials rechristened a new Essex-class carrier, originally called the USS Kearsarge, as the Hornet in tribute. Newly christened, the Hornet proceeded directly on an aquatic warpath that looked more like a Wild West ride of vengeance for the sinking of her namesake. According to information from the carrier's historic group, the Hornet received 7 battle stars for her service in the Pacific, including battle stars for the Marianas Campaign, also known as the Marianas Turkey Shoot, and the Leyte Gulf operations. The battles during World War II and later engagements and missions included recovering astronauts from sea, as well as numerous other escapades that led to some scars. While unscathed by Japanese bombs during the war, many of Hornet's courageous pilots never made it back to the carrier, and other seamen perished due to illness and accidents. Now, this ship is in Alameda, California. It's now a tourist attraction and a floating museum, and it draws the attention of countless people who want to learn more about the ship's history. Other people who visit the Hornet, especially the paranormal researchers, those interested in the supernatural, believe they can actually touch this history by reaching out to the spirits that are said to still haunt the ship. And the stories of hauntings come from all walks of life: visitors, former ship hands, staff, historians. And those stories of supernatural encounters can happen at any time of the day or night. Over the past few years, the activity hadn't necessarily picked up. It'd be hard to measure that, but it's definitely become more well documented. Ship's own website, and there's quite a thorough website, I may say, as well as blogs and other sites, are full of tales and witnesses that experience weird activity during their visits. Paranormal researchers have gotten in on the act as well. They tell stories that include a range of unexplainable activity, from the sounds of footsteps walking down and empty hallways to terrifying shrieks and screams that seem to have no source. People claim to have sensed presences pass by them or through them, as well as felt temperature spikes. One minute the boat will be warm and welcoming, the next will be cold and definitely uninviting. While skeptics easily dismiss claims like these, paranormal investigators have confirmed odd temperature spikes and drops, as well as electromagnetic aberrations. So let's talk about some of the more vivid encounters that have been documented about this ship. The Hornet's most famous spirits made so many formal appearances on the ship that stories of his visitations have actually become commonplace. A member of the USS Coast Guard team volunteering on the Hornet said he ran into a ghost while on an errand on the ship. His guardsman undertook the task of painting a compartment on board the Hornet, wore a white paper suit to keep clean during the chore. And as their paint supply started to run out, Bob decided to get some more cans from another co-worker. And as he walked through the ship, he promptly got lost. He wandered through the narrow passageways trying to find either his crew or the co-worker. Well, as he navigated around the main passageway on the ship's starboard side, he was startled when a person popped out of the main hall about 25 feet from where he stood. Now, Bob thought it was a co-worker. In fact, he thought it was one he was looking for, so he called out to him. But the man kept walking. He watched as the figure walked down the hall and cut into another passageway. Well, Bob followed. When he got to the hall where he last saw the man, he found not only was the area chained off, but that the compartment, the only place the man could have gone, was empty. Not even Houdini could have made an escape. Baffled, the guardsman managed to rejoin his group of volunteers and later sought out the co-worker he assumed he had stumbled onto during that hunt for paint. Bob asked him why he didn't respond to his call, and the man said he went in that area of the ship. In fact, he never left the room where he toiled away for about an hour. Now, there was no way the figure clad in white walking through the passageway was his companion. But if it wasn't him and the ship was empty, who was it he saw? Bob got some answers when he recounted his tale. One of the Hornet's employees overheard the conversation, immediately recognized the identity of the mysterious sailor when she heard Bob's description. Except, as she explained, it wasn't a living sailor. It was making his rounds of the ship. The employee told the workers the man Bob saw may have been the ghost of one of the Hornet's former sailors. And she said other witnesses who saw the ghost a little more clearly than Bob had noted the figure was decked out in his finest dress whites. Ghost has appeared so often he earned the nickname Dress White's Ghost. Well, another visitor on the ship had a similar run-in with a decorated spirit of the Hornet, and one that resembles Bob's Dress White's ghost. In an online comment, a witness named Kathleen wrote that she and her husband and her aunt toured the Hornet a few years before. Closing time was approaching, and they neared the end of the tour, so Kathleen's adventurous husband dragged her to a part of the ship that appeared to be off-limit to tourists. And they wandered through the dimly lit passageways, navigating around piles of surface equipment. Well, Kathleen became a little concerned. She said her heart began to beat faster and her respiration increased. She felt lost, had visions of getting arrested for entering an off-limits area of the Hornet. Her worst nightmare suddenly appeared in front of her. A naval officer in full dress uniform suddenly appeared around the corner. And she wrote that she knew they were in trouble then, but the officer didn't bark out any orders for the couple to vacate the secure area. He just walked right past them. Another weird aspect of the officer struck Kathleen. She never noticed any breeze or wind as he walked closer by her. She watched the figure make a crisp turn into one of the rooms, and the room the officer had entered, there was nobody there. In fact, like a lot of the other rooms in that section of the ship, bed frames and other pieces of what you might call artifacts, or if you're not being understanding, you might call it junk, filled the berth. No way anybody could have maneuvered around it. The officer had just vanished. Although the snappily dressed sailor seemed a bit shy on the first sighting, he'd make his presence known to a couple in a big way. Well, she was beginning to feel very unsettled, started to beg her husband to leave the haunted section of the ship. Now, as soon as she told him she wanted to leave, then her camera ripped off its snap and crashed to the floor. In the 8 years she had owned that camera, that strap had never failed, not once. After her tour, she had time to reflect on her adventure. She became certain she had seen a ghost. And people familiar with the haunted Hornet guessed she saw the Dress White's ghost himself. Well, Fleet Week is a U.S. Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard tradition to dock active military ships recently deployed in overseas operations in a variety of major cities for a week. When thousands of sailors hit the streets of San Francisco during the city's Fleet Week, you're going to see a lot of weird stuff. But one member of the U.S. Naval Sea Cadets saw some and heard some very strange things during Fleet Week in 2005. He said it went beyond weird and something he'll never forget. He wrote that he was lucky enough to spend the week on board USS Hornet. That was a super treat for the cadets, who were young men and women considering enlisting in the U.S. Navy. And even before the lights went out, word had spread among the cadets they were camping on a haunted ship. Unfortunately, at 3 in the morning, the cadet got called to guard duty, or as the cadets called it, fire and security watch. He got dressed and made his way through the cavernous halls of the great ship, joining a few of the guards on duty. And not long after he began his watch, his run-ins with the paranormal began as well. Screams echoed down the halls, and the cadet sprang into action. He called security and told him he'd heard somebody scream out in anguish and had to be a medical situation. But when they searched for the source of the screams, they couldn't find anybody. A few of the guards who also heard the scream joined the security officers looking around the section near where they swore the screams came from. But they couldn't find anything or anyone. The cries seemed to come out of thin air. Well, an hour later, the ghost came back again. This time it wasn't a sound that jarred the cadet's attention. It was a smell. He caught the scent of a pipe or cigar and immediately called for security. They figured somebody must have slipped out of the bunk for a smoke, and security knows that they saw a smoker on the fantail section of the ship. Tried to find him, and as they approached, they heard footsteps thumping along the deck above them. So they rushed up to investigate, and just like the phantom screamer, as soon as they reached that section, it was empty and silent. Well, the cadet admitted he was already a believer in the supernatural, but after spending a night aboard the Hornet, he said his beliefs in the supernatural have deepened. He said it had to be the scariest thing he'd ever done. And he wasn't the only one who'd been spiritually affected by his visit on the Hornet. Lord Auerbach, one of the world's most respected parapsychologists, said that based on reports from volunteers, staff, and visitors, there could be many as 50 ghosts on board that ship. He related several stories of his own encounters with the ship's ghosts in interviews and on his YouTube channel. And finally, we have the third of the fighting ladies, the USS Lexington. You know, the Japanese sailors and airmen who fought in the Pacific were afraid of a ghost. They called it the Blue Ghost. Like a vengeful spirit, this ghost appeared out of nowhere and suddenly unleashed unholy hell on the Japanese forces. The Blue Ghost was actually the USS Lexington. But there's another reason for its supernatural nickname. 1942, news spread quickly among the Japanese that Lexington had finally been sunk during the Battle of the Coral Sea. Well, so you can imagine their horror when a few months later they saw the Lexington steaming toward them. They didn't have any way of knowing that the superpowered American war machine had produced a new USS Lexington almost as soon as the old Lexington had settled on the floor of the Coral Sea. Japanese forces were stunned and scared. Throughout the war, the Japanese read reports, heard rumors that the new Lexington had been sunk no less than 4 times. But each time, right after they read the reports, there she came, turning into the wind and launching her aircraft to bomb their ships, shoot down their aircraft, and strafe their gun positions. But the Blue Ghost didn't finish with haunting, according to all reports. Although USS Lexington, like a lot of her fellow scarecraft carriers, is no longer at war, she's not at peace either. There's been a constant stream of reports from her new base at Corpus Christi, Texas, where she served as a museum ship that spirits continue to stalk the decks and berths of the big boat. Haunting of the Lexington is spread out over a few locations, but probably the most haunted spot's the engine room. Ship historians say the rabid Japanese military staged numerous attacks to sink the Blue Ghost that had haunted them so much. And those attacks led to a lot of casualties. And at least one of those casualties, a man who worked in the engine room, continues to keep watch on his ship. Visitors have said they sense a peculiar presence when they enter the engine room. While it's hard to describe, they say they feel like somebody's watching them. Other visitors have seen a more visible display of some unknown force. They said they watched doors and hatches open of their own without anybody nearby. And no external force is evident. But because the ship is open to the public and the rumors of hauntings have circulated extensively, a lot of paranormal research groups, amateur ghost hunters, and people just looking for a good scare have treated the Lexington like a supernatural laboratory. And some of their stories are absolutely mind-boggling. One visitor initially felt normal when he and his members of his family arrived on the ship to take in a historic adventure. Once he started to descend into the ship, though, he had a sensation that another visitor, an unseen visitor, was taking a tour with him. As he took pictures, he became aware of unsettling temperature shifts. First, the room boiled, and then it turned cold. As he probed deeper into the ship's lower decks, the presence became physical. Felt something brush against his legs. Well, the man and his cousin entered the hospital wing, still equipped with some of the medical instruments at the time. Visitor's cousins started to crack jokes about a ghost shooting him with one of the needles on display, which probably wasn't the smartest thing to say in a paranormally intense environment. Soon the cousin began to experience actual pinches and pokes, and marks began to appear on his body, marks that weren't there just a few minutes before. Fortunately, the tour was almost over, and the family would-be ghost hunters left the ship without further incident. Other visitors have encountered spirits in the ship's engine room, though these run-ins seem more benign than the spectral doctor giving out supernatural shots in the hospital wing. Some people seem to think the ghost there is a friendly one. They say they feel something pass by them as they enter the room. Others feel a cool chill. A few witnesses watch in shock as doors slowly close. And again, it doesn't seem to be an errant breeze shutting the doors. There seems to be a definite force pushing the door closed. And then there are the Charlie sightings, according to some writers who discuss some of the hauntings on board the Lexington. Eric Mills wrote a book called The Spectral Tide, True Ghost Stories of the U.S. Navy. Most experts on the haunting suggest a disembodied presence that is detected in the engine room may be related to claims from witnesses who actually seen a shape, if not an actual apparition in the engine room or near it. Sometimes the shape is just that, a shadow or a blurry image staring thoughtfully at the equipment in the engine room. Others see something far more terrifying, such as a full-bodied apparition. Few people offer the rarest type of ghosted run-ins with the Blue Ghost. The spirit actually serves as their tour guide. According to the reports, guests boarded the ship to take a self-guided tour aboard the Lexington. And just as they boarded, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed sailor offered to lead them on a personal tour. They thought he was some type of reenactor. He was wearing an incredibly accurate World War II naval uniform. They thought he was a paid tour guide or maybe a volunteer. And he seemed to know what he was talking about. They thought it sounded like he'd actually served on the Lexington in World War II. This particular incident, he said his name was Charlie and asked him to follow him. And his knowledge of the ship was phenomenal. He recounted stories from the war and reminisced about some of his old shipmates. Then Charlie guided him deeper into the ship's massive interior, and the tour continued. However, the guest said that the tour guide suddenly became distracted and broke away from him. He walked faster and faster, and some of the guests tried to keep up. Some, who were busy checking out the displays, never noticed the guide had departed. According to the report, Charlie rounded the corner and disappeared off the face of the planet. Despite a search, the tourists stranded in the inner recesses of that World War II warship couldn't find their guide. Well, once they got their bearings and made it back to the surface of the ship, they searched for other staff members to complain about the abruptly ended tour. As they chatted with the staff and described their tour guide, the staff members' reply terrified them. Their living, breathing guide said, based on the visitor's description of a blonde, blue-eyed man dressed in World War II uniform, there was no such employee on the staff. And to the staff's knowledge, there was no reenactor on the ship at all. On that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be talking more about the Fighting Ladies in tomorrow's show. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.